The next property that we're going to look at is separate from the transform property, but it should be grouped with transform since it does change the behavior of an item. What transform origin does is it allows you to specify the location origin of the transform. You can think of this as the center point of the element. By default, when you have an element, the center point is in the middle of the element. So if I was going to use the rotate property on this element, it would rotate around itself. And actually, let's just create two of these shapes so that we can compare and contrast. So what I'll do is I'll just create an additional shape and then assign a separate class to it and put a different background color, just so visually we'll be able to see that these are different. So in order to show you how this works using the transform origin, I'm just going to apply a rotation value on the elements. So we'll go ahead and we'll make a rule for the dot shape hover, and I'm just going to use transform and we'll tell it to rotate, and let's just use 720 degrees. And in order for this to work, because right now if I go ahead and hover over these, nothing happens. And that's because, as you already know, we need to specify our transition property, and I'm going to tell it that I want to transition the transform, and we'll have this happen over 2 seconds. So what's going to happen is when I mouse over these shapes, they're going to rotate around their center points. So that is the default behavior. They're rotating right in the middle of these shapes. So it's as if there were a pin that was locking down the center and then the rest of the item is rotating around, much like a pinwheel would rotate around. But what we can do is we can change the transform origin. So I'm going to go into my S2 shape and we're going to add the property of transform-origin. And in regards to the values, you can use keyword values like bottom, center, left, right, and top. So let's use left and bottom, and these keyword values are not separated by commas. You're just going to put them in like so. If we save the page now and we refresh, when I hover over the blue shape, it's going to still be rotating around its center point. But when I rotate over the purple shape, you can see that it's rotating in a different way. Because it's triggered by the hover state, I need to position my mouse over the shape. But what's happening is the shape is moving from this lower left corner. Let me actually move that to the lower right. And then it's going to rotate around this point right here. So if I refresh this and we click on this, you can see it's rotating around that lower right corner right there. So its behavior is quite a bit different than the blue object that we have. I'm going to have this transformation take 4 seconds. I'll just slow it down a little bit so we can really see how these move. And even though everything is the same, by simply changing the transform origin, you can see how the behavior of these items changes considerably. Now, in addition to using the keywords, you could also put in a value. So if I wanted to specify the left top portion of this pink shape, I would use 0% and 0%. Again, there's no comma in between these. You're just going to separate with a space. If we refresh on the page, now this item is going to rotate around that upper left-hand corner. If I want to rotate from the bottom left like it was, I would change these values to be 0 and then 100%. The first number indicates the horizontal position of a shape, so 0 is the point at the far left if there was a bounding box around this particular shape. 100 would be over here on the right. And then 100% for the second value that we're using, that is at the bottom. 0 would be at the top, like we were looking at before. And obviously you could use different values in there. If you used 50% for both, it would be back in the center, which is the default behavior. And you'll want to make sure that you add the transform origin property to the parent element like we did here, not with the transform property in the hover selector. That will not work correctly. So this is a little bit more of a sophisticated setting that we can specify on our objects, but you can see how it does change the behavior of the objects considerably. And this might be something that you want. If you want to be able to really control the movement of an object, you're going to want to investigate the transform origin property.